Please welcome healthcare reporter at Bloomberg News, Zachary Tracer, who will be interviewing founder of Khosla Ventures, Vinod Khosla.
Thank you all so much. We're really excited to be here. We've heard a lot of really exciting stuff about genomics and AI, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in the next 20 minutes. I'm here with Vinod Khosla. He's an entrepreneur, he's an investor, he's a technology fan, and as I'm sure you all know, he's the founder of Khosla Ventures, which is focused on impactful technology investments in areas including health and AI, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I think the place I wanted to start, if you don't mind, is just to talk a little bit about sort of the timeline for AI in healthcare. Sort of what's going to change now, and then when we look down the road, what should we look forward to?
Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. It's exciting to see such a large crowd talking about this new area. And I don't mostly consider it old healthcare. I consider it new healthcare, and we can go into it. Let me start with an analogy, because I'm well known for saying let me start with a story. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was meeting with the dean of the medical school at Harvard, Jeff Flyer, and said, you ought to change your admissions criteria for doctors. It's very hard to get into Harvard Medical School. You need an IQ off the charts. And I said, almost everything high IQ gets you. Human systems, AI systems will do much better than the highest IQ humans. So you ought to change your focus to hiring the highest EQ systems, people. And I, not jokingly, but he thought I was joking, said, you ought to go look at the admissions criteria for USC Film School. Because if you're going to have humans do mostly the human element of care, which is what I think their role will be, you should look for the most humane humans, not the highest IQ humans. The highest EQ humans is what you should look for. People who can put themselves in the other human's shoes when they're going to tell them they have stage 3 breast cancer. Right? That's not something a machine should do. Having said that, 80% of the things, and I'll come back to the timeline question, that human doctors do today should be done by machines and will be done by machines. It's only a question of when. Now let me go back to your timeline. Let me go to an analogy, because it's easiest to understand. My first cell phone in the 80s was about the size of a sewing machine. I actually had to mount it on the floorboard on the passenger side of my car. It was on the floorboard. It was about probably 30 pounds. It was a heavy thing. You couldn't lift the whole thing. And that was without batteries, because it was wired into the car. There was no batteries. It was permanently wired in. The handset cord was much, much bigger, about 5 times the size of my iPhone today. 3 or 4 years later, most of you have seen that brick phone that Motorola had. It looked like a brick you held up to your ear. 3 years later, you got a slightly better phone, probably from Motorola. On and on, accelerating. Every 3 years or so, you got a new generation of phone. The big revolution, if you remember, in the year 2000, almost 12 years later, was the Motorola StarTAC, which was a flip phone. And then three or 4 years later came the BlackBerry, 3 or 4 years later came the iPhone, and then we've seen generations of iPhones. Why is this analogy important? I think the first healthcare AI data-driven systems we are seeing are like that floor-mounted cell phone. And every 3 years or so, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 2, we'll see a new generation. And so if I were to describe V0 through V7 or V8, we're talking 25 years. And so when I say AI will replace almost everything human doctors do, and we can talk about this endpoint and then talk about what happens in 3 years and 5 years, almost everything will be done. I'm hard-pressed to see what won't be done by machines, leaving aside interventional medicine. So surgery will probably be done by machines, but a little harder to predict today. Everything else that's mostly judgment will be done by machines.
But this is a long ways off.
This is a long ways off, but every 3 years you'll see a new generation. So let me come back to today. What are we seeing today, what we see as V0 medicine? I presume there's some press in the room. I know Color is just announcing population health genomics. So we've had the human genome for a while. We've seen a lot of talk about this. We've not really had a genome for humanity, where it really benefits humanity. And I think the first generation you're seeing is Color announcing a pretty phenomenal thing with UCSF and University of Washington, Jefferson, and a few other systems. This idea of population screening. By proving it's cost-effective enough, and they have some phenomenal hardware and software talent, which has dramatically reduced the cost of coming to the answer. Are you at risk of cancer? Are you at risk of cardiovascular disease? That's like Gen 1, but it's pretty phenomenal.
And so Color is a company that you work with, a genomic
Yeah, it's
testing
one
company.
of our investments, phenomenal team, and they're just announcing this population screening idea, which for the first time, by proving it's cost-effective to do it, it saves more money. That leave aside the human benefits, it saves more money than it costs to do it.
And these are some of the tests for things like
BRCA1, BRCA2, risk of various cancers, risk of cardiovascular disease, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, have you personally done any of these tests? Is that
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, how has doing all this work in healthcare and AI, how has that changed how you interact with the healthcare system?
So, because I sort of operate at the bleeding edge, not only have I done the Color test, I have 4 kids, all 6 of us have done the Color test. And it's we had a cousin develop breast cancer at age 40. It was imperative that everybody do the test. Because you know how traumatic that is. So that's my point. It's cost-effective, and its benefit for humanity are very humanistic to do these tests.
And you're already getting care that's sort of benefiting from this leading edge of technology.
Yeah.
How do you think that some of what you foresee in AI is going to affect the healthcare that you get during your lifetime?
Well, let me give you another example. We have a company called Carius, which is also here. I think they're announcing some things on Tuesday. When you have a heart disease, and I have a daughter who has chronic fatigue, so I spend a lot of time looking into the innards of medicine. We screened, and they screened for 12 or 1,300 pathogens out of each blood sample. For one price. If you have a infectious disease you can't diagnose, instead of going multiple years through multiple levels of shots in the dark that your physician may take, well, is it this disease or is it that? Is it a fungus or a fungal infection or is it EBV or something else? They screen for all the pathogens using, again, cell-free DNA. So it's not antibodies that may be from a previous infection. It's like what's going on in your body today. So that's another great example. So this intersection of making genomics useful, and we can come back and talk about proteomics and others, I'm very excited about why transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and all the phenotypic data will add so much more to medicine and do two things. I'm sorry, I'm going off track. It'll do two things. It'll add so much more to medicine, like 100 times more. Almost everything we use for diagnosis will be obsolete. Mm-hmm. Everything you learn in med school will be irrelevant because every disease will be diagnosed differently.
So we're sort of
like I'm wandering off.
We're working
Sorry.
on the building, but we're working on the building blocks for what you see as the ultimate AI revolution, right? So one of the building blocks is you need to have all of this genomic data. You need to have data for the computers to use to work on this AI that you're describing. What else? What are the other sort of medical advances that are going to contribute to what you see as maybe 25 or 30 years in the future?
Well, so if I look 25 years out, it's hard for me to imagine that symptom-based diagnosis, which is the fundamentals of medicine, will still be around. You should detect almost all diseases way earlier. And it doesn't matter. Larry Marr, he talks about it openly. A friend of mine at UCSD, he's one of the best computer scientists there, runs this supercomputer center, got IBD. Mm-hmm. Right? He detected, and I measure a lot of variables every month, practically.
You personally do?
I do. I probably get a few thousand biomarkers every quarter.
So give us some examples.
Give us some examples. I run the whole metabolome test every 6 weeks. It's 900 biomarkers that they give back to you. I add the Genoa test. I add the THD test. I have my own immune panel. I want to know what's going on in my body. And it's very hard to interpret. I have to sit there and trace metabolic pathways individually. It's not what people should be doing. I'm trying to learn what's possible, so it's more research for me than anything else. It's not what others should be doing. But I say, what is interpretable? What isn't? What changes from test to test every 2 months? But my point is, let me go back to your question. So what I said is the negative. We won't do symptom-based medicine. You won't have stomach discomfort to diagnose IBD. You'll have molecular markers that diagnose it 2 years earlier. You won't have symptoms to diagnose diabetes. You'll have molecular markers to diagnose. And they may not be single markers. They may be arrays of markers. For those of you more mathematically inclined, they'd be like attractor nodes in a Lorentz equation, right? These are attractors the body settles into because there's 3,000 metabolic pathways interacting with each other in the body. No human being could look at it, but a machine can say, hey, this shifted from A to B, and because of that, you now have diabetes. I mentioned chronic fatigue. I'm almost 100% certain, having researched it, that it's a change in attractor nodes, a concept that most physicians can't understand when I talk to them. Mm-hmm. But when I talk to a researcher, we had such mind meld on what shifted the attractors and why some people respond, because when you perturbate such a system, you may move from state 1 to state 2, or you may go back to state 1. Anyway, back to your question. Let me talk about some of the things we are doing, because it's pretty exciting. We are doing AI and ultrasound, AI and MRI, AI to completely disrupt MRI. So AI can run the machine and do the diagnosis at the same time, and when it finds something, spend more time there. So we can fully characterize your heart in a 15-minute MRI that measures things radiologists will tell me generally cannot be measured in an MRI, like your blood perfusion, your ejection fraction, your scarring in your heart, your ventricular flows. We can get all that by using new physics on an old MRI machine. And we can reinvent MRI machines. So if you could do that in 15 minutes, you could do it as part of an annual physical.
Yeah.
So imaging is going to change. We have ultrasound being done the same way with Bay Labs. We are reinventing the annual physical, which would do heart, would do full body imaging. It has to be done for $100. It can't be done for $1,000.
Right.
It has to be less than a physician visit. And we are doing all the omics in an annual test. Right? So if you do that, your annual physical will actually be useful, and you go spend $300 for a doctor visit, it'll actually be useful to you.
Yeah. Now, in this world you're describing, it seems like maybe if you're a radiologist, you might be a little bit worried. How are doctors, you mentioned this before, how is medicine going to change? How is the practice of medicine going to change?
Look, first, there aren't enough doctors, and there's supposed to be greater shortages. We are doing cardiovascular medicine. My watch actually predicts what my heart rate should be. So yesterday when I walked up a hill for a hike, it just went all the way to 155, but my prediction band was, it was within my prediction band. I knew my heart was okay because my heart rate was going up. If I showed it to a cardiologist, they say, you got tachycardia. But this builds a dynamic neural net model of my heart on an Apple Watch. Costs almost nothing. They market the service at $10 a month. The average user is doing 20 ECGs a month. Think about what it would cost the medical system. We can do it for $10 a month and have a physician manage it within that price range. Now, if you're a cardiac patient, wouldn't you do it? My point, radiology almost certainly, and let me be a little bit radical, I apologize to radiology, if in 5 years, so today probably 50 things you can do with an algorithm. You need 1,000. Within 5 years, you'll do 900 of those with an algorithm and 100 with humans. And if any radiologist is not using these systems, they'll be killing patients every single day they're practicing. Whether they get prosecuted for it or not, they will be killing patients, and I hope they adapt to this new technology. Now, the good news, whether you're a primary care physician, whether you're a community oncologist, whether you're a radiologist, whether you're a pathologist or a cardiologist, 80% of the intelligence in keeping up with the 5,000 articles published last year in cardiology, the AI system will do and provide you bionic assist so you can interface with your patient and you can interface with twice as many patients. Right? That is the fundamental sort of 5 to 10 year view. One should think in terms of these versions of systems, first offloading you 20%, and then 40% of your work, and then 80%.
So these are AI augmented doctors, AI assisted doctors.
I call that bionic assist for doctors.
That's a better name.
Yeah. So they can spend so much more time interfacing with the patient, not doing all this other stuff, and frankly, not guessing, not going in the back there and looking up Wikipedia.
Maybe up to date.
It is the most consulted resource in medical literature today. So,
well let's move a little bit away from that. Let's make it real concrete. What kinds of companies do you want to invest in now because of your views?
So my personal interest, so if you have a company that increases billing for a provider, don't call me, right? Frankly, I'm very particular about not increasing the cost of medicine. And technology generally has done that. And frankly, when you increase billing, you're even cheating the system, adding new CPT codes and stuff. What I care about is inventing new medicine. If you can find a patent that predicts you'll have diabetes in 2 years, I'm interested. You know, most people in this day and age discover they have cardiac disease by having a heart attack. That's archaic. You shouldn't discover cardiac disease by having a heart attack. You should know 30 years earlier that things are changing. You have plaque building, and be able to do something about it when you can prevent it.
So people now know what to talk to you about at the happy hour.
If you're doing new science, new medicine, new instrumentation, new genomics, you're talking about, I loved David's from Garseniga's view of genomics. It just, a $100 genome is way too expensive by a factor of 4 or 5. If we can eliminate the, you know, I'm pretty sure within 5 years, the single largest cost in doing a genome will be FedEx. FedExing a sample. It should be below 20 bucks. And it will be below 20 bucks, and we are working on that. But using those for even more benefit for humanity, doing more science, much better imaging, doing 10,000 biomarkers per blood test for 50 bucks. So you can actually diagnose all these systems which are interconnected inside your body simultaneously. Those are the kinds of things I'm interested in, things that are not in medical textbooks today.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We have to leave it there, unfortunately.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys. Thanks.
Thanks.
It's great.
Thank you, Zachary and Vinod. This concludes our general session for this evening.